Great. We'd like to turn to the audience now. We have people with microphones. If you'd like to make a comment, we'd ask you to keep it very brief, responding to our panel and to the question before us today. Raise your hand high so I can see you, and I see some friends already raising their hands. So perhaps we'll call on the dynamic duo of first Simon Maxwell, then Gerda Verburg, and then move over to the rest of the room. In particular, we'd love to hear friends from Africa sharing their views after that.
Simon Maxwell, member of the IFPRI board and half of the dynamic duo. How exciting is that? We know from the IPCC that we have to have a zero CO2 economy by 2065 and a zero greenhouse gas economy by 2085, and zero means zero. I want to know whether you think agriculture and the food system can do that, and if we work back from then to now, what immediate actions must we take between now and 2030 in order to set agriculture on the path of complete decarbonisation, including animal production, fertiliser, water, transport, logistics and everything else? Can we then still tackle hunger?
Gerda.
And he is the other half of the, of the duo. I have 2 points to raise. First to Mr. Marta. What do you exactly mean by technologies? I mean, there are so many technologies, but I had the impression that you were pointing at GMOs. But probably I'm wrong. Elaborate a little bit, please, about this. My second point is, and if we are, will be very strong in supporting farmers to become carbon neutral, etc. What does it mean for investments in agriculture and in making farmers, both men and women, making a better living in order to send their children to school and maintain their rural activities? Thank you.
Excellent question. We'll take a few more inputs, then turn to the panel to respond with some closing comments. Who else would like to make some comments? Yes, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. My name is Aissatou Jallow, and I'm the Senior Nutrition and Partnership Advisor at the AU NEPAD based in South Africa. I wish to refer to the last panelist, the recommendation to IFPRI to conduct research as to why African governments have failed to live up to their pledges. I want to take you back to 2004, when IFPRI had a huge conference in Uganda, and I was privileged to be on the advisory committee assuring food and nutrition security in Africa by 2020. At the time, there was a polling of the participants, and most of them were talking about the lack of political will from the African governments, and that's why we were in the situation that we were then. Now, 10 years later, in 2014, the African governments came up with 2 declarations, one on agriculture and 2 on nutrition security. So there we have the political will. But most importantly, the 7th commitment of the Declaration on Agriculture was on mutual accountability to actions and results. So that recommendation to IFPRI is supported, yes, but I would also want to ask IFPRI to work with NEPAD to advocate for accountability. Because in this commitment to mutual accountability, we have that political will, and the first reporting is supposed to be in 2017. So while looking for the bottlenecks, can you also work with us to advocate for accountability? Because that's what we are focusing on in NEPAD now, to make our heads of government accountable for the pledges that they have made, especially the ambitious commitment to end stunting within a decade. No, not to end stunting, to reduce stunting to 10% and to end hunger. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear from the AU and NEPAD perspective on the very strong political commitments from the African governments to make significant progress in realizing the potential of African agriculture. Other comments and inputs from the audience? Yes, please go ahead.
Ross Garno from the University of Melbourne. A comment on, and the presentation by Martin, my predecessor in the IFPRI board chair. Martin, you talked about the potential conflict between agricultural productivity, rural incomes, and climate change mitigation. I agree this is a very important area of research, but I would suggest that there are some rather positive potential areas of research, areas that may suggest high complementarity between climate change mitigation and agricultural and rural incomes. I'll just give 3 examples. A lot of recent work has shown that concentration on increasing carbon content in soils, which can contribute substantially to mitigation, can be helpful to agricultural output. Second example, a lot of the emissions in agriculture are from agricultural inputs like fertilizers, which in their production, nitrogen fertilizers, ammonia, generally generate a lot of carbon dioxide emissions. But with developments in technology, there are opportunities for generation of green ammonia from renewable energy. And in those rural and provincial areas with good opportunities for low-cost renewable energy production, there may be high compatibility between new decentralized industry growth and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And the third one, probably the biggest, if we're going to get to zero net emissions in the third quarter of this century, there's going to have to be negative emissions in some areas. The one proven technology for negative emissions is photosynthesis through biological systems, and that represents great opportunities for rural development in agriculture, forestry, and related areas.
Thank you very much. We have time for 1 or 2 more comments. I'd love to hear from the private sector on the question of investing in agriculture, if anyone from our colleagues from the private sector would like to join. In the meantime, perhaps you, sir, go ahead.
Hi, Chris Delgado from World Resources Institute. I think it was even stronger in the policy panel at the beginning as opposed to the technical panel. But basically, we've sort of run out of kind of free carbon, free land, free water. And we have, according to the UN, we have 1/3 of the world's agricultural lands that are degraded. You know, half the world's forest has been cut down, and it's continuing to be cut down. And agriculture is often blamed for that. On top of it, you've got wood demand that's probably going to expand 6 times faster by volume than food demand in the next 50 years. So basically, you've got all these pressures. And there's really no way that I think you can deal with them without having a sort of landscape level solution that deals with wood demands and agricultural demands and ecology needs at the same time. I'll just end by saying the New Climate Economy Project that launched its main report in September 2014 and is still going strong has done work that says that agriculture and forest, together land use, can provide up to 15 to 35% of the mitigation you need by 2030 to get back to a 2-degree pathway. It can be done, but it really requires addressing this land degradation problem.
Thank you. And we had one other input from over here.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Peter Matlin. I'm board chair of IFPRI Rice. And I'd like to take some issue with the narrative that Rob Parlberg provided as to the stagnant nature of agriculture in Africa. It was a generalized statement that he made, and I believe if one disaggregates the continent and one looks back over trends over the last 15 years, the picture that he has drawn is simply not accurate. If you look at what has occurred in a growing number of countries, probably 24 or so, since the major policy reforms that were introduced in the mid-90s and intensified late 90s, early 2000s, you have seen a response in many countries and in many commodities of significant increases not only in production through area expansion, but also productivity, primarily driven by improvements in the policy and market environment and shifts in the development of technologies and deployment of technologies. Simple example, if one looks at rice in Africa, between 2008 2013, there was a significant improvement in productivity with rates of productivity per unit of land of a roughly 7% sustained over that period. That's competitive with the Green Revolution. Why? Because of the price spikes and adjustments in the incentives for farmers, improvements in efficiency in marketing systems, we saw that farmers responded. So I would really hesitate us continuing to repeat a 20-year-old negative narrative on stagnant African agriculture. Let's disaggregate, let's understand where it's moving and what are the factors. That way we can spread the good news to a wider range of countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, and a great challenge from the floor, aligned with our colleague from AU and NEPAD about the great potential and progress in certain areas in Africa. I'd like to turn to our panel and ask you each to make just a brief 1-minute response. Sorry for the short time frame, but to share some of your thoughts on some of the comments that we've heard today. I'm actually going to start with Claudia and go down the line. What's your final message from the broad array of perspectives that we've heard this morning in terms of what you feel are the top actions that are needed? Claudia, first to you.
Yeah, in fact, I'd rather quickly respond to Simon, if you don't mind, because I've, anyway, had many messages already. So I agree with Chris that it can be done. We could get to zero net emissions, but there are no incentives for farmers to do so, and there is no political commitment. I think there will be much more done on energy and other sectors first. So agriculture, I think, will come last, as it often does. How can we do it? We need to invest in nutrient use efficient varieties. Can be done, some work is going on, but not sufficient. There has been absolutely almost no research on how to reduce energy intensity in fertilizers. Nothing has been done in 50 years. I think now some work has started, and obviously much more has to be done, looking for a contribution from fertilizer to emission reductions. And yes, everything has to be seen in the larger land use, in a larger land use framework. So we can't see agriculture without the forests, because if we cut down 1 hectare of remaining tropical forest in DRC, the same hectare could be farmed for hundreds of years, to get to the same emission outcomes. So basically, we don't want to cut down that hectare of remaining forest. We want to farm the remaining land that's already farmed much more intensively to get to the zero degradation. And just on sub-Saharan Africa, I do have to agree a bit with the speaker, the last intervention, Peter Madeline as well. Schengen already mentioned it. We actually have seen significant improvements. If you remember the TFP slide that I showed, sub-Saharan Africa actually has been picking up over the last 10 years. My big question is, will it stay the way, given where things are currently moving in terms of investments in agriculture research? And I have some strong doubts. I have some strong doubts that we will continue the course, the very positive course over the last decade. But I hope the course will continue. Thanks.
Thank you. Jikun?
I want to pose one question and one message. A question on mitigation and adaptation to climate change. I think for developing country, we need more attention to how to adapt to climate change, both in long-term and short-term extreme weather events, drought, flood, those issues. For mitigation, I believe for many developing countries, they still much invest in fertilizer and other input. And of course, they can learn some lesson from developed countries where they very intensive use of agricultural input. And one message is, given all challenges and opportunity we have discussed here, I think that in the future, we need to take more comprehensive, integrated system approach to food for the sustainable agricultural sector. I think one single policy, one single technology, one single department won't work. We need a more integrated approach.
Thank you. Geraldo.
Okay. I think that one point that deserves to mention is that in the past decade, the main strategy to reduce emissions in Brazil was decreasing deforestation. And we are, we did pretty well. Today, the level of deforestation is about 16, 18% of the level of a decade ago. So this provides a huge decrease in greenhouse gases emissions in Brazil. When we are thinking about the future, and here comes the question of technology, if we decrease the contribution of deforestation, the contribution of the other sectors will proportionately increase. And of course, agriculture will be in the highlight. So here comes two things. Which technology? The whole package. If we want to make, I like pretty much Jikun's when he said we need to focus on the system, and it's exactly this. We need to focus on the system, so can be seed, can be systems. For example, we have these integrated crop livestock systems in Brazil that, depending on the place, you can produce 365 days a year without irrigation. This is amazing. You can have a first short soybean cycle, then you harvest soybean, and you can no-till planting corn with brachiaria, and then you can harvest the corn, and you can have a kind of third harvest, with cattle. So it's something amazing. And when you are doing that, the potential to increase soil carbon is 7 tons per hectare. So we are talking about to increase soil organic matter, and when you increase soil organic matter, this means that you are capturing carbon from the atmosphere, and you are stocking this carbon in the soil. So yes, you have a mitigation effect, but in tropical soils, if you are increasing soil organic matter, you are also increasing the resilience of the system. You are increasing the capacity, the adaptation of the system to respond to to future threats. One point in technology adoption in Brazil is that, Brazilian farmers, they are pretty much exposed. If you go to the producer support estimate, we are talking about less than 4% of the gross receipts. So they are going to do things when they have the perception that this thing will pay, will increase their incomes. And I need to finish here, but one major point is market distortions. Especially for the small farmers, especially for the poor. If you don't correct market distortions, or at least try to alleviate it a little bit, all policies directed to those fellows, all technologies directed to those fellows, they will not have a kind of, the results, the good results at least that you have in mind. So.
Thank you. And very briefly, Robert and then Martin.
I appreciate the question about Africa, and it's correct. From a West African perspective, things do look better. The FAO per capita index of food production in West Africa is higher now than it was in 1975, but I worry that some of the growth in Africa, including agriculture in recent years, has reflected a perhaps temporary increase in commodity prices rather than an actual fundamental increase in productivity growth. On the question of sustainability and climate change, the only way to move towards sustainability in agriculture is through a technology upgrade and higher productivity. When I make that case in front of environmental groups, I'm accused of being what they call a productionist. I didn't realize that was a bad name. I explain to them production and productivity are very different. Production means growing more without changing the way you grow it. I don't like that. Productivity means producing the same amount while using less land, less labor, fewer chemicals, less water. That's what I like. That's the only way to protect the environment. And I'd like to say a word here for American agriculture in this regard, where you've seen the highest productivity growth anywhere in the world. In the United States today, we're producing 5 times as much corn as we did in 1940, even though we're planting less land to corn. If you compare corn, soybean, and cotton production in the United States today to 1980, On a per bushel of production basis, we have reduced diesel fuel use by 30 or 40%, irrigation water use by 30 or 40%, land use by 20 or 30%, and greenhouse gas emissions by 30% or more. It's productivity that's the escape, not an expansion of low-yield farming, but more productivity on the land that's now being farmed.
And lastly, Martin.
Yes, thank you. There were three questions or comments in relation to the climate change. And of course, that's a very messy and difficult issue, both technically and politically. Of course, it must be a great concern for everybody. And of course, there are great opportunities, as it was mentioned. For example, zero deforestation, it's a reasonable objective. Zero till, precision agriculture. There are things that can be done and obviously would greatly increase the balance. But one of the problems we have is that there's great uncertainties on measures. As one panelist in another panel I participated recently said, in regards to gas emissions, in energy, we have great certainties. In agriculture, we mainly have uncertainties. We really don't have appropriate measures, so we really don't know exactly what is the gas emission balance in different agricultures, in different agroecologies. So one of the main priorities is we need to do a lot of research because we might be generating or making correcting measures on places where we don't need to make them. My second point is, having said that from a technical point of view, is that there's a political question here, a political question that has to do with equity and who pays for the adjustment. It has a historical element and it has a practical, immediate of equity component. For example, how much pressure can the world put on livestock and small farmers in Africa in the immediate future? Can we really ask with reasonably that production gets eliminated? Well, maybe, I don't think so, but maybe. But that would cost a lot of money. People would have to be totally compensated for the loss. Is society, humanity willing to do that? Do we have the global institutional mechanisms to do it? Do we have people willing to do that funding? Well, all those are, I think, issues that are very much up in the air. And what I'm just saying is, it's a great concern. We need to resolve the problem, but we need to be very careful in the way and the speed in which we move.
Thank you, Martin. This has been a fascinating discussion that's almost impossible to summarize. But I think if I had to characterize the spirit, I would say it's cautious optimism with some very big caveats. We've heard the tremendous potential to increase food supplies with the existing tools that we have, the policy approaches, the technology, and within the recognition that with additional investment in agricultural R&D, and supporting countries to achieve their true potential in agricultural production, we can actually meet the world's needs. Some of the hugest caveats are around climate change and political will, I would say. Can we achieve a complete decarbonization of the agriculture sector? Can we implement landscape-level solutions that will be quite complex to implement across sectors? Will Africa and other regions translate the very strong vision and political will into real results on the ground that improve livelihoods for farmers? These are all unresolved questions that I hope we can continue to discuss throughout today as we continue this dialogue. At this point, I'd like to thank all of you for your contributions as well as our excellent panel and turn it back to Rajul for our next steps. Thanks to the panelists.